The dove-stitched shirt hung wrong on the corpse's frame sleeves, too long, shoulders too broad for any 12-year-old boy. Eli Granger knelt in the cemetery mist, his weathered hands trembling as they traced his wife's familiar needlework. 20 years of frontier living had taught him to trust his instincts, and every sense screamed danger. A mourning dove called from the pines. Sarah's favorite bird, the one she'd embroidered on every shirt she made for Caleb. The sound pierced Eli's grief like a blade. And in that moment of distraction, something shifted inside the coffin. With a dull thud, "My boy," he whispered. But his voice carried doubt now. The shirt, the sound, the wrongness of it all. Sheriff Amos Dade stood nearby, shovel-ready, watching the broken father with growing unease. Something felt off about this entire burial, the haste, Deputy Hank Brill's insistence on quick arrangements, the way the body had been found. Beside him, Ruth Cole shifted nervously in her black dress, pale fingers worrying at her sleeves. Ruth had prepared hundreds of bodies in her 15 years, as the territory's undertaker. Her father had trained her well how to read death signs, how to catalog wounds, how to remember details that others missed. This corpse haunted her because of what wasn't there, the scar that should mark Caleb's left arm from his childhood accident. "Sheriff." She began hesitantly, glancing around the empty cemetery. "Something's wrong. The shirt doesn't fit, and there should be a scar on his arm." Eli's head snapped up. "What scar?" "From when he fell off his pony and caught his arm on that broken fence post. I helped your wife clean the wound. It left a mark." Ruth's voice grew stronger. "This body has no such scar." Sheriff Dade's instincts, honed by 20 years of frontier law enforcement, screamed warning. "Open it," he commanded, reaching for his knife. "Before we put anyone in the ground, I need certainty." The coffin lid groaned open with sharp cracks that echoed like gunshots. What lay inside made Ruth gasp and the sheriff curse under his breath. The body wore Caleb's shirt, but it draped wrong on a frame too broad for any child. The left arm bore smooth, unmarked skin where a scar should have been. Tucked beneath the corpse's shoulder, hidden by loose fabric, was a folded piece of paper. Sheriff Dade's hands shook as he unfolded it and read aloud. "The boy lives. Devil's Fork Canyon. 2 days before they move everything. Come alone. They watch everyone." 3 weeks had passed since Caleb vanished from the Granger ranch, leaving only bloodstains and boot tracks leading toward Pine Creek Gulch. Eli had spent 6 sleepless days searching those canyons, his bad legs screaming with each step, calling his son's name until his voice gave out. The leg wound from Antietam had never healed properly. The Confederate musket ball remained lodged against bone, a constant reminder of that blood-soaked cornfield, where he'd learned what men were capable of doing to each other. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what the war had done to his mind. Eli Granger slept light and woke armed. He read terrain like scripture and could spot an ambush from a mile away. The hypervigilance that had kept him alive through Gettysburg and a dozen smaller battles now served him well on the frontier, but it came at a cost. Every shadow might hide a threat. Every sound could signal danger. At 43, scarred by war and hardened by loss, he worked his ranch with the methodical precision of a survivor. Caleb was his anchor to humanity, the last piece of Sarah who died of consumption 5 winters past. The boy showed his mother's curiosity and stubborn-streaked traits that both warmed and worried his father. The ranch sat in a defensible valley, 6 miles from town, surrounded by pine-covered hills that offered both protection and isolation. Eli had chosen the location deliberately after the war, seeking peace for his small family, far from the chaos of Reconstruction. But peace was an illusion in a territory where outlaws moved stolen rifles through Pine Creek Gulch toward the Mexican border. The Spanish had once mined gold in those hills, but modern treasure flowed in the form of weapons, army rifles diverted from shipments, and sold to revolutionaries fighting their own civil war south of the Rio Grande. Ruth Cole understood violence in her own way, As the territory's only undertaker, she'd prepared bodies torn by bullets, knives, and worse. Her father had taught her more than embalming. He'd insisted she learn to shoot to defend herself in a world where women often stood alone. The townspeople still whispered about how she'd driven off 3 drunken cowboys with her father's old Sharps rifle, putting 2 bullets through their hat brims to make her point. More importantly, Ruth had been Sarah's dearest friend and had helped deliver Caleb into the world. On Sarah's deathbed, she'd made a promise that only she knew about, to watch over the boy from the shadows, to be his guardian angel, without interfering in Eli's relationship with his son. For 5 years, she'd kept that vow, faithfully checking on Caleb during her monthly visits to the ranch, noting his growth, his health, his developing character. She knew every mark on his body, every scar from childhood mishaps, every detail that identified him as uniquely himself. The morning Eli left for his supply run to Tombstone, Caleb had seemed restless. "Why can't I come along, Pa? I'm tired of talking to cattle all day." "Next time, son." Eli promised, though he noticed how much the boy had grown in recent months. "Keep that Spencer loaded and don't wander toward the gulch. I'll be back by sunset." But when Eli returned that evening, his world shattered. The ranch stood empty, Caleb's horse still in the barn, but the boy vanished without a trace. Near the corral gate lay a blood-stained bandana Sarah had sewn for their son, and fresh tracks led northeast toward the lawless maze of Pine Creek Gulch. For 6 agonizing days, Eli had combed those canyons with the systematic thoroughness of a military scout. His war-trained eyes read sign like text, following boot prints across stone, noting broken twigs and disturbed earth. But the tracks vanished into country where 100 men could hide unseen among the countless caves and hidden passages. On the 7th day, 2 cowhands discovered a body floating in Pine Creek's deepest pool. The corpse roughly matched Caleb's height and build, but the face had been beaten beyond recognition, features obliterated by what looked like deliberate brutality. Strangely, the body wore no boots, an oddity that nagged at several observers, but was dismissed in the face of Eli's obvious grief. Eli identified the remains by the dove-stitched shirt, Sarah's distinctive needlework, unmistakable, even waterlogged and torn. "That's her work," he'd whispered to Sheriff Dade, though something in his soldier's mind whispered warnings he was too grief-stricken to heed. Deputy Hank Brill had pushed for immediate burial, citing the summer heat and Eli's emotional state. "Best lay the boy to rest quickly," he'd advised with apparent sympathy. No sense prolonging the family's suffering with delays. Ruth had prepared the body with unusual haste, claiming concern about decomposition. But her real urgency came from recognition, or rather the lack of it. This wasn't Caleb Granger lying on her preparation table, and she needed time to figure out why someone wanted everyone to believe it was. Hank Brill had been watching her work too closely, asking pointed questions about timing, and requesting the burial happen at dawn with minimal attendance. His behavior set off alarm bells in Ruth's mind, bells that grew louder when she remembered his recent meetings with rough-looking strangers near the creek. Now staring at the note that confirmed her worst fears, Sheriff Dade understood the careful deception that had nearly fooled them all. But before anyone could speak, Deputy Hank Brill emerged from behind a tall headstone, his hand resting on his gun butt with practiced casualness. "Morning, folks." Hank said, his voice carrying a tension that made Eli's battlefield instincts scream danger. "Heard there might be some trouble with the burial." Eli's war-trained reflexes kicked in without conscious thought. His weight shifted to his good leg, his right hand drifted toward his sidearm, and his eyes cataloged distances, cover angles of fire. 20 years of civilian life fell away, like shed skin revealing the soldier beneath. "Just checking something, Hank," Sheriff Dade replied carefully, noting his deputy's positioning and alert stance. The man had placed himself with clear lines of sight and easy access to cover, not the stance of someone offering help. "Checking what exactly?" Hank's voice carried an edge now. "Seems like you're disturbing a grieving father for no good reason." Ruth stepped forward, her undertaker's composure masking inner steel. "There's been a deception, Deputy. This body isn't Caleb Granger. That's a serious accusation, Ruth." Hank's eyes hardened. "What makes you so certain?" "Because I know every mark on that boy's body," she replied, lifting her chin with quiet defiance. "I helped birth him, and I know he should have a scar on his left arm. This corpse bears no such mark." For a heartbeat, Hank said nothing. Then he laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Always were too observant for your own good, Ruth. Just like your daddy." The words hung in the morning air like a confession. Sheriff Dade's hand moved toward his weapon, but Hank was faster, his Colt clearing leather with the fluid motion of constant practice. "Easy now, Sheriff. Wouldn't want any accidents in sacred ground." Eli rose slowly from beside the coffin, his movements controlled despite the rage building in his chest. War had taught him patience, taught him to wait for the right moment to strike. "Where's my son, Hank?" "Alive last time I checked," Hank replied with casual cruelty. "Though that might change depending on how reasonable you folks decide to be." The truth emerged in bitter fragments. Hank had been feeding information to gun runners for over a year, his deputy's salary insufficient to cover debts that went beyond simple gambling. The war had left him rootless, bitter, watching other men like Eli build peaceful lives while he struggled with empty pockets and emptier prospects. "Your boy stumbled onto one of our operations 3 weeks back," Hank explained, keeping his weapon trained on the sheriff. "Saw me and some associates loading rifle crates near the hidden waterfall. Smart kid, he watched from cover, but we found his tracks afterward." "So you took him?" Eli said, his voice deadly quiet. "The others wanted him dead immediately." Hank admitted without remorse. "I convinced them he might prove useful leverage against his famous war hero father, maybe information about other ranchers' defenses. Plus, dead children bring federal attention we couldn't afford." "And this," Sheriff Dade gestured toward the coffin. Hank's smile turned vicious. "One of our associates caught a bullet in a payment dispute. Same general build as your boy, so we borrowed young Caleb's shirt, rearranged his face beyond recognition, and let nature provide the rest. Perfect plan, you'd grieve. Stop searching, and we'd have time to complete our biggest shipment ever." The calculated cruelty struck Eli like a physical blow. This man who'd shared coffee with him, discussed weather and cattle prices, even attended Sarah's funeral, had orchestrated an elaborate lie designed to destroy a father's soul for profit. But it was worse than greed. As Hank talked, Eli heard the bitterness underneath the resentment of a man who'd never found his place after the war ended. Hank had watched Eli build a life, raise a son, find happiness despite loss, and that happiness had become poison in his own empty soul. "We served together, Hank," Eli said, pain and bewilderment warring in his voice. "I pulled you out of that shell crater at Antietam when the rebel cavalry overran our position. You were bleeding out, and I carried you to safety." Something flickered in Hank's eyes, memory perhaps, or the ghost of the man he'd once been. For just a moment his gun hand wavered slightly. "I remember," he said quietly. "But that was a lifetime ago, Eli. This is about surviving in a world that doesn't care about old soldiers or their problems. You found your peace. I never found mine." "Where is he?" Sheriff Dade demanded. "Devil's Fork Canyon, about 8 miles northeast. Old mining camp near the rim." Hank's expression hardened again. "But you're running out of time. The big shipment moves tomorrow night, and after that loose ends get tied up permanently." Before anyone could react, Hank backed toward his horse with practiced caution, keeping his weapon trained on them. "Don't follow too quickly, folks. My associates are watching the approaches, and they have orders to shoot anyone who gets too close." He mounted in one fluid motion and spurred his horse toward the gulch, leaving them alone with the truth and less than 2 days to save a child's life. "We need help," Sheriff Dade said as they hurried toward town. "This operation is bigger than we thought." No time for pauses. Eli replied grimly, his military mind already analyzing the tactical situation. By the time we gather men and explain everything, Caleb will be dead. Ruth caught his arm. Eli, you can't go alone against professional killers. Then pray my war training serves me well. He answered, though privately. He wondered if a 43-year-old man with a damaged leg could face armed smugglers and survive. They reached the jailhouse to find it empty, except for old Tom Fletcher sleeping off another drunk in the corner cell. Sheriff Dade gathered ammunition and supplies, while Eli studied detailed maps of the Gulch country, his practiced eye noting elevations, water sources, potential ambush sites, and escape routes. There's something else, Ruth said quietly. Something I haven't told you. Both men looked at her expectantly. I made a promise to Sarah before she died. Ruth continued, tears flowing freely now. She asked me to watch over Caleb from the shadows, to be his guardian angel without interfering in your relationship as father and son. I've kept that promise for 5 years. Eli stared at her in amazement. You've been protecting him all this time, as best I could. When I realized this body wasn't Caleb, I knew someone was playing a deadly game. I suspected Hank because I'd seen him meeting with rough strangers asking strange questions about the boy's disappearance. Why the note instead of coming directly to me? Ruth's expression hardened with resolve. Because I was afraid he'd kill Caleb the moment he learned his deception was discovered. The note gave you information without alerting his watchers. Understanding dawned in Eli's eyes. This woman, Sarah's dearest friend, had risked everything to protect his son, honoring a deathbed promise with courage that humbled him. Then we save him, he said simply, all of us together. But as they prepared to ride, Ruth surprised them both by retrieving her father's old gun belt from a locked drawer. The leather was worn but well maintained, and the Colt .45 nestled in its holster showed signs of regular cleaning. Pa taught me to shoot when I was 12. She explained, noting their expressions. Said a woman alone needed to be able to defend herself. I've kept in practice over the years. Sheriff Dade nodded approvingly. They'd need every advantage they could get. They rode hard through the afternoon, 3 unlikely allies bound by love for a missing child and determination to see justice done. The country grew wilder as they climbed toward Devil's Fork Canyon, dense pine forests, giving way to broken stone and treacherous ravines carved by ancient volcanic activity. Eli's tactical mind cataloged everything: sight lines, choke points, defensive positions. His leg throbbed with each mile, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing on the mission with the same intensity that had kept him alive through 3 years of war. As they neared the canyon approaches, Sheriff Dade called a halt. Movement ahead, he whispered, pointing toward a rocky outcrop where sunlight glinted off metal. Eli's experienced eye picked out the sentry immediately, a man with a rifle positioned to watch the main trail, alert and professional. These weren't simple cattle rustlers or opportunistic thieves. They were dealing with an organized operation with military-style discipline. We circle wide. Eli decided, his voice taking on the crisp authority of a combat veteran. Stay in cover, watch for other sentries. They'll have the approaches under observation. For the next 2 hours, they picked their way through difficult terrain, avoiding main trails and staying beneath the tree line. Eli's war-honed instincts guided them around 2 more guard positions, invisible watchers who would have cut them down without warning. As evening shadows lengthened, they finally gained a vantage point overlooking Devil's Fork Canyon. The old mining camp sprawled below them, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a central courtyard, where armed men moved between stacks of wooden crates. Rifles. Sheriff Dade whispered, studying the scene through field glasses. Must be 300 of them. Eli's heart stopped when he spotted a small figure tied to a post near the largest building. Even at this distance, he recognized his son's profile, the way Caleb held his head when trying to show courage despite fear. But the boy looked different, thinner, more alert, somehow older than his 12 years. 3 weeks of captivity had changed him, forcing premature maturity in ways that broke his father's heart. "There," Ruth pointed. "He's alive." As they watched, one of the smugglers approached Caleb with obvious menace, gesturing with a knife while talking animatedly. The boy's response, a defiant lift of his chin, was pure Granger stubbornness, and Eli felt a fierce surge of pride despite his fear. "Count 8 men," Sheriff Dade reported. "Good positions, clear fields of fire. This won't be easy." Thunder rumbled overhead as storm clouds gathered, promising the kind of violent weather common to these mountains. Eli studied the camp layout with a tactician's eye, noting guard positions, weapons, placement, potential cover, and concealment. "What if we don't attack directly?" he mused. "What if we make them come to us?" He pointed to an abandoned watchtower perched on a rocky prominence above the camp. Signal fire up there would be visible for miles. They'd have to investigate can't-afford army patrols spotting smoke signals from known outlaw country. "Divide their forces," Sheriff Dade agreed. "Even the odds." "I'll take the tower," Eli decided. "You two circle around and get ready to move on the camp once half their men leave to investigate." Ruth shook her head firmly. "That's suicide, Eli. You can barely manage rough terrain on that leg." "I can climb," he said with quiet conviction. "And I can shoot straight. That's all that matters." What he didn't say was that his war experience had taught him to push through pain, to function, despite physical limitations, to complete missions regardless of personal cost. If climbing that tower would save his son, he'd make the ascent if it killed him. Dark clouds boiled overhead as Eli began his painful ascent toward the abandoned watchtower. Each step sent fire through his damaged leg, but he climbed with methodical determination, using techniques learned during night raids on Confederate positions. The tower stood precariously on a stone outcrop, its wooden frame weathered but intact. Eli doused the interior with coal oil from his supplies, then struck a match. Flames roared to life, creating a beacon visible for miles against the storm-darkened sky. The reaction from the camp was immediate and predictable. Shouts echoed off canyon walls as 4 smugglers climbed toward the burning structure, leaving 4 men to guard the prisoners and supplies. Better odds, but still deadly dangerous for a man with limited ammunition and a permanent limp. Rain began falling in heavy drops, turning stone slick and treacherous. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that would mask the sounds of movement and gunfire. Weather that would complicate his mission, but also provide concealment. Eli waited until the investigating party disappeared into the rocks above, then began his careful descent toward the camp. His military training served him well: how to move silently, how to use available cover, how to approach an enemy position without being detected. He made it within 40 yards of Caleb before being spotted. "Well, well," a familiar voice called from the shadows. "If it ain't Eli Granger come to play the hero." Hank Brill stepped into the firelight with 3 armed men, his Winchester rifle held with casual competence. But there was nothing casual about his eyes. They held the flat emptiness of a man who'd made peace with violence. "Mahelo, Eli," Hank continued. "Right on schedule, predictable as sunrise. Some things never change." "Let my boy go, Hank," Eli said quietly, his hand moving slowly toward his sidearm. "This is between you and me. See, that's where you're wrong, old friend." Hank's voice carried decades of accumulated bitterness. "This stopped being about you the moment your son witnessed our operation. Now it's about survival." The storm intensified, rain lashing the canyon walls and turning the ground into treacherous mud. Lightning illuminated the desperate tableau: father facing betrayer with an innocent child's life hanging in the balance. "You don't have to do this," Eli said, trying to reach whatever remained of the man he'd once called brother. "There's always another way." For just a moment, something flickered in Hank's expression. Regret, perhaps, or memory of better days when they'd fought side by side against a common enemy. But then his face hardened again. Too late for that, Eli. Way too late. I made my choices just like you made yours. Difference is yours led to peace and family. Mine led here. The words carried such pain that Eli almost felt sympathy for his former comrade. Almost. Or where were you when I was drinking myself to sleep every night, trying to forget the smell of gunpowder and dead men? Hank continued, his voice rising. Where were you when I lost the farm, when the banks took everything, when I had nothing left but empty bottles and bitter memories? I would have helped, Eli began. Would you? Hank's laugh was harsh. The great Eli Granger war hero turned successful rancher helping out a broken-down drunk? I think not. That's when Sheriff Dade's rifle spoke from the ridge above, and Devil's Fork Canyon erupted into chaos. The first shot took one of Hank's men's center mass, dropping him into the mud as his companions scrambled for cover. Sheriff Dade had used the storm and darkness to circle wide, gaining elevated position, while the two old soldiers confronted each other. But the remaining smugglers were professionals, and they responded with disciplined fire that forced the sheriff behind inadequate cover. Bullets chipped stone and whined through the air as rain reduced visibility to mere yards. Two can play that game. Hank snarled, bringing his Winchester to bear on the sheriff's position. It was the opening Eli had been waiting for, the moment when Hank's attention wavered, when 20 years of tactical training could be put to use. Moving with speed that defied his wounded leg, he drew his Colt and put 2 bullets into Hank's chest before the deputy could complete his turn. But victory came at a cost. The remaining smuggler concentrated their fire on Eli, making every step toward Caleb a deadly gamble. One bullet burned across his shoulder, another shattered rock inches from his head, a third gouged splinters from a wooden post he'd taken cover behind. The battle became a deadly game of cat and mouse, played out in driving rain and intermittent lightning. Eli used every trick he'd learned in 3 years of war: how to move between cover, how to make the enemy waste ammunition on shadows, how to turn terrain to his advantage, despite physical limitations. His bad leg nearly betrayed him twice, buckling at crucial moments and forcing him to roll behind cover as bullets sought his life. But each time he pushed through the pain with the same stubborn determination that had carried him through Antietam and Gettysburg. Sheriff Dade provided crucial support from his ridge position, his rifle finding targets whenever the smugglers exposed themselves. But return fire kept him pinned, unable to maneuver or provide more direct assistance. That's when Ruth Cole did something that shocked everyone. The quiet undertaker emerged from concealment, carrying her father's old Sharps rifle, the same weapon she'd used to drive off troublemakers years before. Without hesitation, she put a .50 caliber round through the nearest smuggler's chest, the massive bullet dropping him instantly. "Nobody threatens that boy while I draw breath," she declared, reloading with practiced efficiency. Her intervention shifted the balance decisively. The remaining gunmen, suddenly outnumbered and outgunned, broke cover and ran for his horse. Sheriff Dade's rifle ended his flight halfway across the camp, the echo rolling across the canyon like thunder. Sudden silence fell over Devil's Fork Canyon, broken only by the sound of rain, and Caleb's muffled voice calling through his gag. "Papa, I knew you'd come." Eli limped toward his son as fast as his damaged leg would carry him, knife already out to cut the boy's bonds. When the ropes fell away, Caleb threw himself into his father's arms with desperate strength. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." The boy sobbed against Eli's chest. "I knew you'd find me somehow." "Never again, son," Eli whispered, holding his child close and feeling the solid reality of his living, breathing boy. "I'll never leave you again, I promise." But even as he spoke the words, his soldier's eye was cataloging the camp, noting the massive stockpile of weapons and the evidence of a far larger operation than anyone had suspected. This was just the beginning of cleaning up the mess Hank had helped create. Dawn broke clear and bright over Devil's Fork Canyon as they prepared for the journey home. Caleb was thin from 3 weeks of captivity, his clothes torn and dirty, but his spirit remained remarkably unbroken. His experience had aged him in some ways, but it had also revealed a core of toughness that reminded Eli powerfully of Sarah. They kept moving me around. Caleb explained as they gathered evidence from the smugglers' camp. Different caves, different camps. Said they couldn't risk leaving me in one place too long in case someone was tracking them. The boys' account revealed a sophisticated operation with multiple hideouts, regular patrols, and careful security procedures. These weren't simple bandits. They were professional criminals with military-style organization and discipline. I tried to escape twice. Caleb continued with obvious pride. First time I got loose from my ropes and made it almost a mile before they caught me. Second time I left marks on trees and rocks, hoping you'd see them if you came looking. Eli's heart swelled with fierce pride. His son had shown both courage and intelligence during his ordeal, never giving up hope, never stopping his efforts to get free or signal for help. They collected ledgers detailing the smuggling operation maps, showing gun-running routes from Texas to Mexico, and correspondence that revealed connections to revolutionary groups south of the Rio Grande. The network was vast, reaching into multiple territories and involving dozens of conspirators. Sheriff Dade questioned the wounded smuggler who'd survived the battle, learning names and locations that would help federal marshals roll up the entire operation. Justice would be thorough, if not swift. But the most difficult moment came when Eli knelt beside Hank Brill's body in the mud-soaked courtyard. His former comrade looked smaller in death, older, worn down by years of bitterness and bad choices. "I'm sorry it came to this," Eli said quietly to the corpse. "I'm sorry I didn't see how much you were hurting. Sorry I didn't try harder to help." Ruth placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Some men lose their way after war, Eli. The fighting damages more than bodies, it breaks spirits too. You found your path to healing? Hank never found his. They buried Hank Brill in a shallow grave, marked only by stones, far from any hero's cemetery, where he might once have earned a place. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, even in death." The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and bright. As they loaded captured weapons and prepared to leave, Caleb tugged on his father's sleeve. "Pa, why didn't you give up when your leg was hurting so bad I could see you were in terrible pain during the fight?" Eli knelt to meet his son's eyes of the same bright blue as Sarah's had been. "Because I lost your mother once to something I couldn't control. I swore on her grave I'd never lose you the same way. A man protects what matters most, no matter what it costs him, even if it kills him. Even then, son, that's what family means." Caleb nodded solemnly, understanding more about his father's love than most children his age ever would. The experience had changed them both, deepened, and their bond proved their resilience, demonstrated that the Granger family could survive whatever hardships the frontier threw at them. The entire town turned out for their return, drawn by news that Sheriff Dade had sent ahead with a fast rider. Caleb Granger was alive, and the gun-running network was broken, and justice had been served in the harsh but effective manner of frontier law. But the most meaningful ceremony happened privately in the cemetery, where the mysterious coffin was opened before a gathering of witnesses. The unidentified smuggler's corpse still wore Caleb's stolen shirt, proof of the elaborate deception that had nearly destroyed a father's heart. "This shirt was made by my wife for my son," Eli announced to the assembled crowd, carefully removing the dove-stitched fabric from the dead man's body. Despite everything it had endured, Sarah's needlework remained intact, the white doves still clearly visible against the blue cotton. "It was stolen and used to break my heart and hide the truth. But today, it becomes what it always was, a symbol of love that survives anything evil men can do to it." Instead of placing it on a headstone, he folded the shirt and handed it to Caleb. "Your mother made this with love, son. Wear it with pride, knowing you survived what they tried to do to our family." Ruth stepped forward, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Sarah would be so proud of both of you. You've honored her memory by fighting for each other." Sheriff Dade then addressed the crowd, praising Ruth's courage in exposing the deception despite personal risk. Her role as Caleb's secret godmother was revealed, explaining her vigilance and quick thinking in the face of obvious danger. "Why didn't you tell me about your promise to Sarah?" Eli asked her afterward as the crowd dispersed. Ruth smiled through her tears. "She made me swear to watch over him quietly without interfering in your relationship as father and son. She knew you needed to raise him your way, without feeling judged or second-guessed. But when I realized someone was using his supposed death for evil purposes, I couldn't stay silent." The revelation added another layer of connection to their small community bonds of loyalty and love that had survived betrayal and violence, emerging stronger than before. As evening settled over the town, they walked home together through the gathering dusk. Caleb chattered excitedly about his plans to help with the autumn cattle gather and improve his marksmanship and the trauma already beginning to fade in the wonderful resilience of youth. Sheriff Dade had made a full recovery from his wounds and was implementing changes to prevent future corruption in his department. Federal marshals were investigating the gun-running network's connections to other territories, promising a thorough cleanup of the entire operation. Ruth had accepted Eli's invitation to visit the ranch regularly, no longer needing to maintain her secret guardianship from the shadows. The arrangement would benefit everyone. Caleb would have a mother figure to guide him through his teenage years. Ruth would have family to care for, and Eli would have trusted help in raising his son. "It looks different now, doesn't it?" Caleb said, pointing toward the dove-stitched shirt hanging on its familiar peg inside their cabin. "Like it means something new." Eli smiled, understanding exactly what his son meant. "Your mother stitched love into every thread of that fabric. What those men tried to do with it, using it for lies and deception, that was never its true purpose. And now it's what it always was, a symbol of family, of love that endures no matter what tries to destroy it." In the distance, a mourning dove called from the pines, its song carrying across the valley like a benediction. Sarah would have been proud of how they'd both survived their greatest test, emerging scarred, but unbroken, their bond stronger than ever. The frontier remained dangerous, filled with men who'd trade honor for profit and loyalty for convenience. But it was also home to people like Ruth Cole, who'd risk everything to protect the innocent, and fathers like Eli Granger, who'd face hell itself rather than abandon those they loved. The dove-stitched shirt hung in its place of honor, no longer a tool of deception and death, but a banner of life triumphant over all who would destroy it.